Okay, good morning. Earl, can you hear me?
Yeah, hang on.
Give us 1 second. We're live on the feed, but we're gonna go live on the actual cam in 3 seconds.
All right, I'm back. Let's move. Yeah. So, good
Five,
morning.
3, 2, action.
Welcome back to What's Going On with Earl Ingram. I constantly talk about the importance of what it is we're attempting to do with this podcast. And and I'll tell you, the freedom that I have in doing this is what makes it, I think, as powerful a podcast as there is anywhere. And today is no different. We constantly talk about the education problems that exist, not just across the city of Milwaukee, but across the nation. And so there are a lot of different reasons, a myriad of reasons why things have gotten as bad as they've gotten. Generations have been allowed to basically, you know, not be educated. We know it, and yet as a nation, we've kind of turned a jaundiced eye to that. And so my guest today is one person who I've been longing to have a dialogue with about what is taking place. Especially today, we're going to focus on Milwaukee Public Schools in the city of Milwaukee and what has transpired. She is a lady of many talents, but spent over 30 years ago. She was a school board member in Milwaukee Public Schools and saw things probably at that point in time we were a lot better off than we are today. But she has certainly put together a comprehensive plan. It's called Restoring Milwaukee Public Schools Financial Accountability, Transparency, and Improving Student Performance. I'm honored and privileged to have before me this morning Joyce Mallory, former school board member of Milwaukee Public Schools. Good morning to you, Joyce. How you doing?
Good morning, Earl, and thanks for having me on today.
Well, I will tell you, I have admired you. I, this is this is scary over decades, uh, but it's true. You have always had a bigger than life persona in our community. People respect you. Uh, tremendously for the things you've done in the city of Milwaukee in the way of education and other things. But let's begin by who is Joyce Mallory?
Well, Joyce Mallory is, when I've been here since 1968. I transitioned right out of college, Tougaloo College, where I received my undergraduate degree and came to Milwaukee. I knew only the Lockhart family who resided here, who had moved here uh, because Mr. Lockhart was active in NAACP and he was going around getting people registered and he got blacklisted and actually probably uh, uh, would have been killed by the Ku Klux Klan had he not escaped the little community where he was the principal and I was a student at the elementary school. And some almost 60 years later, I'm still here. And it was the result of his daughter Ernestine, who was secretary of the NAACP at the time. And of course, I was coming out of Tougaloo, uh, the civil rights movement, and she wanted me to volunteer for the NAACP, and I said, "Oh, they got to change their name because I'm black and I'm proud and I'm colored." And so we had that debate, and finally, she convinced me that I should volunteer. And so it was through her insistence and my willingness to do what she asked me to do, and out of respect for her father, and knowing the struggles that I left in Mississippi was the reason why I left Mississippi. Um, the NAACP provided a pathway for me to become engaged, get to know some of the issues, uh, what was going on in Milwaukee at the time, and it was the desegregation issue, actually. It took Milwaukee much longer than it did some of those areas in the South to desegregate its schools. And so I got involved on behalf of the association, serving on task force committees, going to school board meetings, responding to calls that parents had about mistreatment of their children in schools, that I would go into schools, talk to the principals, talk to others. I remember getting my car towed on Wisconsin Avenue because I was meeting with somebody at Children's Hospital on behalf of a parent who called the association about how her child was treated. So it was through that provided a pathway for me to figure out that education is the critical element at that time, and always has been, that will enable African Americans to get ahead, and forge a path that they didn't think they could have in the North. They couldn't have in the South, and that's why they came north, looking for that opportunity. And so uh, I've been out there doing something other, as we say, since then, trying to make a difference and be a difference maker.
Well, you have been that, and I don't know if you know it, but I and my generation were right at the apex of the desegregation movement in the schools. And I recall I went to Garfield Avenue School from K4, from kindergarten all the way to sixth grade, and it was all black. And Grant Gordon was the first
Mhm.
black principal, and I had black teachers, male as well. And in I don't know 1967, 68, 60, whenever it was,
Mhm.
I went from an all black reality in the sixth grade to seventh grade with desegregation. I wound up at a place called Peckham Junior High School.
Yeah.
So I went from all black from K4 to sixth grade. And
Uh-huh.
then in the seventh grade, I went to a 97% white school.
Mhm.
And I think people believed at the time that we were going to get a better education because we went to an all white reality, which really wasn't the case because, we got treated certainly not equally. I know
Yeah.
the premise of what people thought at that point in time
Mhm.
was a good premise, but it just didn't transfer into reality. And people had to really pay close attention to what was taking place. Different different qualities of education were taking place in those schools. I think it was believed that if you set black children next to white children, they would get a better quality education, but that wasn't the case.
No, we now know that, and the associations certainly believed in desegregation, and my premise was that I knew that disinvestment at some point would occur at all black schools. That the per pupil cost in all African American schools, or schools of color, would eventually erode over time because people wouldn't put as much resource in there. So my premise was always based on, economics. But what Milwaukee never did and still doesn't do, it didn't prepare its teaching staff. It didn't set a tone that we will educate all children regardless of where they attend school, um, and make the kind of policy and practice change that enable some school districts to be more successful at doing this than others. So Milwaukee's moved thousands of kids, have spent hundreds of millions of dollars busing kids from here to there, and the outcomes are probably worse because in that all little black Garfield Elementary School, you had teachers who knew you, knew your
Absolutely.
parents. You saw them on
Absolutely.
Sunday because they went to church with you. You
They
saw them at
lived
the
in my
grocery
community.
stores because they lived in the neighborhood
Right.
with you. And so the kind of disruptions and the kind of violence and the kind of disassociation that we have now in schools didn't occur back then. It was a much closer ethos. You could go there, be who you are, and learn. And that's what I had. I mean, I had to drive. I rode the bus 20 miles each way to school in a little country rural school. Uh, from first grade to 12th grade. That was how I got to school, and the resources were woefully under. We didn't have any. I took a chemistry class, never did an experiment because we didn't have the equipment to do so, even though my mother went and complained to the white superintendent that she was tired of her daughters having to use secondhand books and no equipment to be able to do a science experiment with. So from rural Mississippi schools to northern schools, some of the same discriminatory practices were in place. The discrimination in the South was, we will separate you because, of course, we don't want you sitting next to my daughter or my son. And that was okay because my Black teachers taught me as much as they knew, and what they didn't know, they tried to find out and make sure that we all were academically prepared and we had good social skills, didn't tolerate misbehavior, violating rules. That was just unheard of. I didn't have a classmate the whole time I was in school who ever got suspended from school. That didn't occur. That wasn't a policy or a practice.
So would you say that those segregated schools that were so preeminent back in those days did a better job of educating the children than once the laws were changed and integration into segregated schools?
Well, there were areas where I was totally unprepared when I got to Tougaloo. From a science and a math perspective, I never had really good math or science teachers in high school, and so when I got to Tougaloo, they instituted something called new math. We laugh at it now, and I'm going, "What is new math?" But it was very challenging, and I had a really good a math instructor. She was strong and tough. There were elements. I think the biggest, the best practices, and what enabled us to succeed in all Black schools was the teachers' concern and care and the respect we showed to them, and they created an environment where I had classmates I knew that struggle, but we helped each other also. If we were the smart kids, we were supposed to help the kids who were struggling, so nobody fell. So nobody fell. If they dropped out, it was because they just didn't want to go to school. It wasn't because anybody pushed them out or said you couldn't be here because you could stay in high school until you were 21. So there were really great elements, but there were also some deficiencies in those all Black schools, and it was a resource issue. And the ability to be able to attract sometimes the best and the brightest teachers, because a lot of teachers, even though they got their teaching degrees at majority Black HBCUs, a lot of them left Mississippi and went to other places because the teaching salary was so woefully awful. When I graduated from Tougaloo in '68, teacher salary in Jackson was like $5,000.
Joyce, do you think that based on what that we failed in teaching Black students not just now, but we can go back decades and find out that we have, as a society, have certainly failed in educating Black students and Black children, and maybe because in those 60s and early 70s, it was not as apparent because industry was in this city, and many of us could go into industry, didn't need a high school diploma or a college degree and live the American dream. And today that doesn't exist. And so we see it in a clearer light that we've been failing Black children from being educated for half a century. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yes, I mean, we were educated in spite of. Tougaloo, when I went, was very rigorous, and so the academic standards were extremely high, and you had to meet them and succeed them in order to get out. What I don't think policymakers and others, and especially on the public school side, really looked at trend data and information that would help them say what's going on in outside of the school community that impacts our students and our families, and how and there was very little interaction with industry. uh, and I was on the school board when the collapse of manufacturing happened, because I served from 83 to 93. And by
Right. You were
93,
right there. Right
a
there.
lot of the Alice Chalmers was closing.
A.L.
You
Smith.
could see we could see that impact, the economic impact on our communities and on our students and on our children. You could use one measure, who qualified for free and reduced lunch, for example. That percentage started to go up. We, for a long period of time, we didn't have 50% of our kids were qualified for free and reduced lunch. But after the loss of manufacturing jobs, we started to see that number creep up. We also saw an influx of families from other contiguous states around us coming into Wisconsin too. And so that had an impact. And we were, the city or the school district wasn't prepared for that increase. In 1989, we were beginning to close schools. And all of a sudden, we looked up and saw all this influx of students coming in, and we had to quickly figure out how we were going to accommodate them. That's how that whole Slits complex, for example, got built out, because we needed space. And we built Sarah Scott because we needed space. We took the old hospital on Wisconsin Avenue and converted it into a school because we needed space to accommodate the students who were coming in. Birth rate, we looked at birth data every single year. But our birth data indicated that we weren't going to see a significant increase. So we used that data to start reducing, closing some of our schools. For example, we closed Brown Street School. We closed the school on 20th and Valit. We closed 9th Street School. So then all of a sudden, here comes an influx of students, and then we start, and loss of manufacturing and all of that shift. And so I don't think there's ever been, and my whole tenure on the board, there were really never any really. We had an interagency a cooperation with the suburbs and MATC and some of the others, but seemed like the district was never involved in that. And so we never had these conversations about how does industry, business change impact what we do and how we do it. How can we prepare for the next generation of jobs that were going to be created in Wisconsin that was going to require a high school diploma or at least 2 years of college? How do we make sure our children are able to go to MATC, be able to take advantage of that? And so we lost all of that. And a lot of our young families languished under W-2 rules and regulations. they weren't better off. We had a committee that where we were trying to get policy changes. Don't let people who make $30 more lose their SNAP benefits. Let them stay on until they are stable enough to be able to afford groceries before you kick them and their children off. So there were punitive things that were, from a public policy standpoint, that really negatively impacted our families and our children, and the school district was ill prepared to respond to it. There were a lot of programs and services implemented, but the best thing you can do for a low income family is to help them learn, to help them create a pathway to help them be self-sufficient, because everybody wants the economic ability to take care of themselves and their families.
You know, Joyce, because I came into manhood during that period of time, it's always been on my mind. I know as a very young man, Milwaukee had one of the highest standards of living for blacks in the entire nation, and one of the lowest crime uh, statistics in across this nation. I grew up during that period, as I stated before I came into manhood during that situation. But if we look today at what has transpired because we failed to educate young people, I always say to many, you know, people want to talk about the crime rate, the crime rate, the crime rate. If you don't educate young people while they're children, they grow up to become adults, Joyce, and you know, adults understand that self-preservation is the first law of nature, and they're not going to sit still when they realize in a capitalistic society they're not included. And so when we fail to prepare them early on, when that's the best time to do it, when they're children, children grow up to become adults. And
Mhm.
adults have needs and wants and desires, and adults aren't going to sit back and not do anything if they have children and they're hungry and they need a roof over their heads. And so, but we have a society that believed instead of addressing those real issues with the children and making sure they're educated, let's create a cottage industry called the prison industrial complex. And that's the way we've been going. But we can see now that that was a major mistake because you'll never be able to build enough prisons to house those that are coming up who aren't educated in a technological global society.
Yeah, I've been saying to some of my friends, all the young, nobody is upset that the young boys out here every day who are in the streets stealing cars, driving reckless. Nobody ever asks why aren't they in school? Because they're all under 18.
Right.
So I never hear any policymakers, elected officials, or anybody saying, why aren't they in school? And the other question I would ask the schools, do you know why they're not in school? Nobody's asked that question, and they're primarily young Black boys. And as you know, when I was on the board, I had a task force created that looked at why Black boys were not uh, learning and succeeding at the same rate as girls and white boys in MPS. And that was a very comprehensive task force recommendation that we create all blacks, we create single sex schools. And in retrospect, I wish we would have.
Absolutely.
But it ended up being the African American immersion kind of model again. If we can take young Black children, both boys and females, and give them a sense of self-worth, self-confidence. You can rather than you can't, that we're not going to marginalize them, and we're going to make sure that they are learning first about who they are and giving them a sense of self-identity and worth. Because when you like yourself and you feel good about yourself, you're not destructive, because you understand and know the importance of being able to work, strive, and have something. So I said all these kids should be given a reading test who are out there in the streets doing all this work. They should be given a reading test to see at what level can they read. They should be given the driver's test. Can you pass it? Can you not pass it?
If they can't read, they can't
That
never
would be
pass
a critical measure because, and if you went to all these prisons and youth juvenile facilities and gave each person a reading test, you'd find out that underneath all of that, they weren't able to do school because they couldn't read proficiently, they couldn't comprehend, and they got frustrated and they dropped out because nobody said, I'm going to make sure you are reading. So in that document I sent you, the one goal that this city and district and across this state should have, all children, regardless of color, should read at a high proficiency level by third grade. If you put your resources from kindergarten to third grade, no child should go past third grade not being able to read and do the work at fourth, fifth, sixth through 12th grade. So we lose boys between middle and high school. They might go to first year in high school, but when they figure out they can't read, they can't do their homework, they get frustrated, so they act out, they act up, and then they get put out or pushed out or just drop out. And so that is the real problem. Reading gives you the confidence to be inquisitive, to push back. You can ask your own questions. You don't have to always accept somebody else's version of what you think is right. Our kids have lived experiences that their teachers don't have, that people in the school buildings don't have, yet those lived experiences seem to not count in the school building, on the playground, in the neighborhood. But they should, because the people who dismiss those lived experiences could never do what those young people and those young families could do because they haven't had to do that. They've been,
Joyce, these things you're talking about aren't a secret. Dr. Kawanja Kanjufu,
mhm,
um, 20 years ago, wrote a
yes,
series of books called The Fourth Grade uh,
mhm,
Failures for
mhm,
Black Boys, that something happens, that they're inquisitive all the way up through the third grade. They're doing just like everybody else, and then something happens by the time they reach the fourth grade. This is no secret, and yet in the face of that, it hasn't been corrected. Why?
no. Yeah, we had him here doing in service for some of our teachers, and I remember saying that on the floor when I made the recommendation to have the task force, that young Black boys come in kindergarten enthusiastic, eager, ready to learn, because I had one of those little Black boys
Right.
who was always busy, still tapping his feet at 51. Uh, uh, and nobody understood that that wasn't being disrespectful. It's just who they are. He
Yes.
needed to be doing something. So why do we beat the spirit out of our children by third grade or fourth grade is the question that needs to be answered. And it's especially needs to be answered for Black boys. Black boys get suspended more, they get held back more, they get put in special education more, they get marginalized more. So if we don't change the inputs from the beginning, how can we expect better outcomes later on?
Joyce, as a Black man who was once a Black boy, who's raised Black boys to become Black men, I know exactly what it is you're talking about.
Oh yeah.
And so when you talk about, to think that Black boys should they're not Black girls. And so when you have them in the same classrooms and think that Black boys are going to sit with their hands folded and their legs crossed, it's antithetical against who we are as, and the differences between boys and girls and men and women. And so when you prescribed or suggested that there should be those separations in the education early on, boys and girls, I'm 100% in agreement with that. And there's statistics to bear that truth out. Yet we can't get that to happen because people who don't look like you and I, for whatever reason, block those things.
Yes, but they are sending their kids to the academy out there. I mean,
Yes, oh yeah,
high achieving black boys go to Marquette High School, right?
right. That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, so it's really also about, do we really want to educate children of color, or do we want a percentage of them to be those that we marginalize for their entire lives? And so that's the critical issue. And so if Milwaukee wants to be a first class city, it has to address this issue of why, from 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 the time public schools were created in this city to 2025, why have we not successfully educated majority of children of color, especially African American young boys and girls, because
So
they're
Joyce,
they're
go
in
ahead.
that category as well.
So Joyce, what I would say to you is today you will hear the clarion call. There's not enough money in the public school system. The kids aren't being educated because there's a lack of funding in the district. You say what to that?
I say that's not true. The budget for this district is over $1 billion. Figure it out. If every single, if you have operating expenses and overhead, and if you look at how much is in that category of,
1.3 billion.
yes, 1.3 billion budget, how much is going to support the students at the school level, the cost of the teacher, his or her benefits, the administrator, the other resources in that school, and you look at what the average per pupil cost is, it should be higher based on that $1.3 billion, but it's not. And I'll tell you why. Because it's legacy costs associated with healthcare, and its legacy costs associated with pension benefits that is killing the district, just like it's killing the city of Milwaukee and Milwaukee County. And nobody talks about it, and nobody has stepped forth to do anything about it. At least those, and so that is what is the problem. You hear from, and I'm going to call them out, and I'm going to call them out by name. You hear the teachers union always complaining about there's not enough money, yet once residency went away, they moved out of the city, so they get paid by city of Milwaukee taxpayers, but they don't turn around and stay in the city and contribute to the city's tax base, but yet they want more of city of Milwaukee taxpayers' money. And I say there is a sufficient amount of money to educate every child, and there's only 60,000 students. You can't show me another district in this state, in this country, with 60,000 kids with $1 billion budget. I don't think you'll find one. And if you do, it's going to be a well-funded district. So it is not about money. It's about teaching and learning. It's about teaching and learning. Do you have high quality teachers? Do you have accountability measures that people are held to when children are not learning and performing?
So Joyce, let me say to you, because look, there's so much information and that you have and that needs to be unfiltered, which is what you and I are going to be doing today. Is not enough time to cover most of those things. I am thrilled to have this opportunity with you to have an unfiltered discussion about what transpires. You'll hear people say, well, the teachers are being blamed for the fact that children can't learn, and so the social fabric of the young people who attend Milwaukee public schools, that there is no question that the social realities that children face today are a big impediment to education. When you see children that live out of garbage bags and families that live out of garbage bags, and they go to school this morning at this address and then they come home and they've been moved to a different. There are so many social ills that impact and affect the war zones that children grow up in. All of these things, true, they exist, but they also exist like that in other school districts, Joyce, across this nation that are predominantly Black. Why is Milwaukee the worst?
Well, because again, I'm going to say it's about teaching and learning. What goes on in that building. Once that child crosses that threshold of that door into that school building, that should be the most warming, welcoming place that they're going to see that day. Somebody there should know them, care about them, know what their situation is, and don't use it against them. They instead build connection, supports, that says this child will learn and learn to his or her potential. I served as executive director of Malika Early Learning Center for 5 years. We had K4 and K5 kindergarten. Our K5 kindergarten goal was this: all children will read proficiently at the first grade level when they complete K5. And they were able to do that. If you set that as a goal, then you put the supports around those kids that enables them to do that. You put a teacher, a licensed teacher, and an assistant in that room, and they will make sure that kids learn. Kids have the potential to go way beyond. So it's an excuse and a crutch, and nobody holds them accountable. Even those of us who pay the bills don't hold our teachers accountable for what they do or don't do, and the principals and the other administrators. I'm so happy that the new superintendent downsized all of those administrators out of 52nd on 52nd and Valete. I used to drive by there and just ride back there to see how many Mercedes Benz and BMWs were behind there.
Absolutely.
And they were, and I'm so and I wanted to be able to go in there and say, show me what you do every day. How does it support the teachers and the students at the school level, and why aren't their outcomes any better because you're sitting in this seat making over $100,000 of taxpayers' money, and all you waiting to do is for the end of the day so you can go home. No, that is not what is needed. What is needed is an ethos, and we had a lot of that when I was on the board. I had all majority still black schools, but I had principals who made sure that those kids learned. They didn't have a lot of suspensions, a lot of problems, because those principals wrapped their arms around those kids. They knew them all, they knew their families, and that's what it takes. It takes ownership of that child in your classroom. When I was at Malika, I knew every one of my parents. I knew what their car looked like because my office was right there in front of the parking lot. So I could say to the staff, oh, Jemiah's grandmother's here to pick her up. And so when you know who you're working with, when you know their needs, that doesn't become the excuse. It becomes the exception for you to do high quality work.
So, Joyce, you said just so many relevant things, but I'm going to pick one out. So, who sets the goals that should be followed? Isn't that the school board? I mean,
yes.
We can't expect.
Yes.
I mean, that's the part of this that I think is missing in the equation.
Mm-hmm. The board has a responsibility, and we took that responsibility. We did strategic planning every year, and we set strategic goals for the district. But we also developed a set of teaching and learning goals for elementary, middle, and high school. For example, we had a goal that all children would take algebra by 8th grade or pre-algebra by 8th grade, because there is clear data that if a child can do algebra in ninth grade, he or she can do college.
Right.
That is one of the benchmarks for succeeding at the college level. So we set that as a board. We set that as a goal. When I left the board in '93, that was still a goal. Somebody got rid of it because they said, "Oh, it's too hard. We can't do it." Rather than saying, "Yes, we can, and I'm gonna make sure you have the supports you need to make it happen." And so the board has, you have a board clearly that doesn't understand its policy role, doesn't understand that that their constituents elected them to be accountable for what does or does not happen at the district and at the school level. You hold the superintendent accountable, and the superintendent holds principals and the staff accountable for what does or does not happen. So you have a board. I've been observing this board from a distance, and realize that they don't understand their policy roles. A lot of the things that were in place when we were on the board, having a bifurcated system with a secretary business manager, we never had the kind of malfeasance around or lack of compliance and malfeasance that caused this district to lose millions of dollars. How does a district with every child almost qualifying for free and reduced lunch lose Head Start? How do you lose Head Start dollars for low-income children who need that early start and who need to have the supports that Head Start provided to them and their families?
Joyce, wasn't so long ago. Who was it? Bill Clinton, No Child Left Behind, or
Mhm.
whoever it was. Was that all talk, or was there ever any teeth put into that?
The whole leave no child behind should have been a rallying cry for everybody,
Right.
the schools as well as the larger community. And so I'm not sure. I know there were some programs put in place because you do things when you get the money, right? And when the
Right.
money is gone, there's no continuity or continuance of it. So and that's the other problem with the district. There's been a lot of starts and fits and stops, and so something is working, then all of a sudden you don't have the money for it, or you don't reallocate money from areas that's not working to areas that is succeeding, so that success can grow and continue. And unless people are gathering data, using good data to say this works, this doesn't work, and get rid of what doesn't work, nobody ever calls that. And that's why you need internal audits for both academic programs as well as financial, as well as the financials, because you don't need to keep funding what doesn't work. For example, the district did that referendum a few years ago, right?
Right.
And the last one I absolutely voted against because I didn't see anything from the other one that I supported. We have yet to get a report as taxpayers who supported that on how the district used those funds. They were supposed to be used to reduce class size and to do some other things on the academic side of the district. I don't know if that happened or not.
No,
I've heard
there went the
complaints about
benefits.
increased class sizes. So again, we have 60,000 children, majority of whom are housed in some of them in 18th century and majority of them in 19th century school buildings. And yet the suburban schools around us have upgraded their schools, and their children are in 21st century schools, and Milwaukee Public Schools children are in 18, 19, and early 20th century schools.
Let me, because there's so much here. You know, we're looking at high schools that were built to house 2,000 students with 400 students in them. And many of the major high schools, especially on the north side, 450, whatever. the district has to be downsized. It shouldn't have. And to the credit of the new superintendent, they're attempting to address that. And so for a long time, the buildings, again, to maintain those buildings and the people that it takes to maintain them suck up a lot of the financial resources that can go towards educating children. And so we're looking at all these different things at once, and your thoughts on the fact that we've got these buildings that seat 2,000 students. When I
Yeah,
was in school, we had 2,000 students
yeah.
in those buildings.
When I came on the board, we had over 100,000 students. That's a board. That's a policy decision. In collaborate, that's the board saying to the superintendent, bring me a reduction in school size and buildings, a plan with these measures. These are the things this plan should achieve. We should have children should have access to high performing schools in their neighborhood. And if they don't have access to a high performing school in their neighborhood, how are you going to create and sustain one? We're going to make sure that our children are in 21st century buildings. Even though that might be an old building, we're going to take the money we save from those buildings, old buildings we close, and we're going to invest in technology and other supports that will make sure that they are learning in environments that will prepare them for a future that exists now and into the future. That we are going to we are going to take kids off buses, and we're going to take the savings from those buses, because there's no reason to transport a child from 20th and Hampton to the south side of Milwaukee.
Not
That
today.
child in 2025 should be able to walk to school, or their parents should be able to walk them to school or close to school, or drop them off and get back home.
Well, the
And people
argument
say
is that
it can't be done. I just want to say this. Yes, it can. All of
well,
the choice and charter schools, kids don't live in the neighborhood. Most of them, parents drop them off and pick them up every day. It can happen. We can figure out a way. We used to reimburse parents for not using the bus. If so, there was a long-standing policy that MPS, even if you went to private school, you could get reimbursed for dropping your child off for not using a yellow bus. So there are cost savings that can be reinvested and can be used to also lower the tax burden.
so Joyce, there's just so much here, and we have to bring this to an end for today. But you're gonna join me again, right?
Oh yeah, I,
Oh,
I,
listen, there's
I,
so much
yeah. I
information.
mean, I could talk. This is something that when I sat and wrote that document, I was livid, first of all, because I'm saying, how dare somebody allow this to happen to our children? But it did. And so now it's on people like me who know what can be done and who's done it, and others. We need some parents, and we need. I said, if I could do one thing, I'd have me an army of parents who could be well trained. They would be in each school every day, observing what goes on or what doesn't go on, and be able to be a voice and be at 52nd and Valita at every school board meeting, calling people out for what they are or not doing on behalf of their children.
So Joyce Mallory, it is more than a privilege to have had this short period of time with you. But you and I are going to talk about when we can do this again, and sooner, I hope, rather than later,
I'm always
because this.
available, Earl.
Well, listen, we'll set this up, and I would love to be able to do this with you once a week. But we'll see how that works on your schedule. Until
Okay.
the next time,
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
it's been more than great. This information long overdue. Miss Joyce Mallory, former school board member of Milwaukee Public Schools. Have a great day until we meet again.
Yes, thank you. You
All right,
too.
thank you. See you later. Well, man, that was good stuff.